Saskatchewan.
Madam Speaker, I've decided to share today for the first time the story of my young cousin Gabriel, who died by suicide on March 25, 2021. I hope this story provides some comfort to others and sharpens our understanding of the impact of this government's proposal to legalize suicide for those with mental health challenges. Gabriel was born here in Ontario but spent most of his life in the United States. He had a loving and supportive family, which included 3 siblings, but he struggled throughout his life as a result of personal health circumstances that were generally hard to classify. He had Asperger's syndrome and other things that affected the way he experienced the world, and these health challenges made it difficult for him to form relationships with his peers. These challenges contributed to a sense of rejection and loneliness. But his family was always there for him, helping him work through these challenges and helping him to see his God-given dignity and purpose. In conversations, my uncle has reflected on the contrast between Gabriel's experience and that of his younger sister, Anastasia. Anastasia has Down syndrome. Society perceives her as having a disability, and in fact, babies with Down syndrome face an extremely high abortion rate because our society fails to value people with Down syndrome, and also because Down syndrome is poorly understood. Though perceived as having a visible disability, Anastasia is full of life, joy, and happiness, which she effortlessly shares with all who she encounters, especially those who are suffering. Gabriel, by contrast, did not look any different. He did not have an easily recognizable disability, but he had immense pain that was largely invisible to the world around him. I last saw Gabriel during a family road trip in 2019. At the time, he was working as an independent construction contractor and doing very well. As happened with many young small business owners, though, his business was hit hard by the circumstances of the COVID-19 pandemic, even though he himself was not at great risk from the virus. In March of 2020, a lot of North America and the world shut down as a result of fears about this novel coronavirus. People died from the virus, but many also lost livelihoods and communities, as well as the opportunity to engage in meaningful work. So many died by suicide, in proportions that we will never know precisely. Now, this government chose those unusual circumstances as the time to push forward their radical agenda of legalization of medically facilitated suicide for those facing mental health challenges. The government brought their new euthanasia law into force on March 17, 2021. This bill made changes to the euthanasia regime in Canada, which were universally decried by the disability community. As it relates to mental health, the bill contained a mechanism by which the prohibition on legalized medically facilitated suicide would automatically expire 2 years later, so on March 17, 2023. So the government legalized suicide for those with mental health challenges, but delayed the coming into force of that legalization until this year. Meanwhile, my cousin died by suicide 8 days after the passage of this legislation, on March 25, 2021, just shy of his 26th birthday. These events were not connected. My cousin wasn't following Canadian politics at the time and would not have seen our deliberations as relevant to him where he lived. But as I got the call from my father in the lobby of this very chamber, I thought about the many people like Gabriel who will be affected by our work. The many people who, like Gabriel, live with unseen pain, have highs and lows, and are deeply loved by family and friends. Up until now, the message that we have all sought to deliver to people like Gabriel is that they are loved and valued and that their lives are worth living. It has been famously said that he who has a why to live for can bear with almost any how. This insight was explored in depth by the great psychiatrist and concentration camp survivor, Dr. Viktor Frankl. Frankl observed and reflected on the circumstances of his fellow prisoners and came to realize how important meaning is to human life. Human beings are highly adaptable to circumstances, even when those circumstances involve extreme pain. Their ability to endure that pain hinges on their sense of meaning and purpose. Again, he who has a why to live for can bear almost any how. Frankl developed a psychological method called logotherapy out of this insight, that in a therapeutic context, helping people develop an understanding of their purpose and their meaning provides the critical ingredient for happiness, even happiness in spite of pain. For someone suffering from physical or mental health challenges, there is the immediate treatment or therapy that they receive, but there is also the larger social context that shapes their ability to see meaning and value in their life in the midst of suffering. I think colleagues here will identify with the fact that when someone in your family is suffering from mental health challenges, you seek to help them reduce or eliminate their pain, but you also seek to show them that their life has value and meaning in the midst of that pain. The problem is that we now live in a society that increasingly misidentifies the meaning of life as being the avoidance of pain. We follow Bentham in thinking that happiness is simply the maximization of pleasure over pain, instead of appreciating the historically much more common insight that happiness consists in the life well lived and the life lived in accordance with meaning and purpose. Today, many people think that there is no point in living if one suffers, whereas in the past it would have been universally accepted that a person can live a good, meaningful, and even happy life that includes a measure of suffering and pain. If we as a people come to define meaning and happiness as the avoidance of pain, then we contribute to a loss of hope for people like my cousin. He can live a good life if he is able to believe that his life has value and meaning in spite of his pain. But if he is made to believe that the good life consists solely in the avoidance of pain, then he must endure both the pain of the moment and the loss of perceived purpose and value. The combination of pain with a loss of purpose is likely always a cross too heavy to bear. My uncle told me that his message to Gabriel was always, "We'll get through this. We'll figure this out." Gabriel's family sought to push back against the idea that an early death was inevitable for someone like Gabriel, showing him that a good life was possible and that obstacles could be overcome. But when legislators endorse medically facilitated suicide for those who are grappling with questions of purpose and meaning in the midst of great pain and suffering, we send them the message that their life is not worth living, and we undermine their pursuit of meaning in the midst of that suffering. When doctors or when employees at Veterans Affairs Canada put suicide on the table as a way out, then they sharply send the message to the sufferer that maybe their life is not worth living, or that early death is inevitable because of what they're going through. So today, I would like to send a different message. I would like to say to the Gabriels of the world, you are loved, you are valued, and your suffering and pain do not rob you of your essential human dignity or your ability to live out a noble purpose in the world. I want to send that message because it is true, but also because it is therapeutically useful. That all those who are looking for meaning in their life can know that such meaning can be found even in the midst of pain. And notwithstanding the government's position, I hope that my statement today does send that message. Now, Madam Speaker, I know that the government's response to this is to suggest that there is some sharp moral and legal line between suicide on one hand and MAID on the other. MAID, or medical assistance in dying, being the uniquely Canadian and politically manufactured term for when a medical professional intentionally kills a patient. So is MAID for a person with mental health challenges the same thing as suicide? Well, of course it is. The only difference is that the actual pulling of the trigger is done by someone else. It is suicide with an accomplice. Is MAID available to the suicidal? Well, either MAID is for those who want it, or it is for those who don't want it. Assuming that MAID is still supposed to be only for those who request it, and since the term suicidal literally means desiring suicide, then MAID is for and only for those who are suicidal, by definition. The minister responsible for mental health recently told the House that assessors and providers for MAID are purposely trained to eliminate people who are suicidal. Now, perhaps her use of the term eliminate was a Freudian slip. But if she means that those who are suicidal are not eligible for MAID, then who in the world is eligible for MAID? The non-suicidal? It becomes evident when one provides simple definitions for the words being used that so-called MAID is the same as medically facilitated suicide, and therefore that the policy of this government is to have the medical system offer to facilitate the suicide of those who are experiencing suicidality as a result of mental health challenges. And such an offer fundamentally changes the message that those suffering will receive from society about the meaning and value of their lives. Now, specifically, the House is today debating Bill C-39, a bill that would extend the coming into force of this heinous reality for another year. I support Bill C-39 because I will support any measure that further delays the coming into force of this horror. Conservatives believe that this should be delayed indefinitely, but in the meantime, we will vote for the legislation in front of us. Who knows, perhaps the extra year will mean an election, a chance to euthanize this grievous and irremediable proposal once and for all. Now, finally, I know that many members of the government share my opposition to the proposal, at least privately. I spoke earlier about the work of Viktor Frankl. In his work on logotherapy, he outlined how moral distress can be detrimental to a person's mental health. He tells the story of one patient who experienced great moral distress because of things he was asked to do at his job. His psychiatrist had for years been working with him on a complicated regimen that involved the reevaluation of events in his childhood. Frankl himself told his patient to just get a new job, which solved the problem entirely. So to those experiencing moral distress, do not overcomplicate a simple matter. You will lose your sense of self and your own sense of meaning in life if you sacrifice your moral judgment to a fanatical justice minister. Please stand for what is right. For the Gabriels of the world, there is too much at stake. Thank you.
Question